So once you determine what your property is, obviously, like I said, the long and the short is you're allowed to do it in your anywhere in the county. But this is where you can go to the zoning ordinance and you can see farming. The zone was R60, and it's a permitted use. Okay, it's not a limited use. Yes, Wendy.
Mark, I'm hoping you can clarify this because I've been confused trying to figure that chart out myself. I have an R60 zoned home.
Okay.
Can I have a farm on my property with my house there, or there has to be an undeveloped property? That's part one. And part two would be, does that mean that if I look at the definition in the zoning ordinance for farming, which includes like livestock and horses and all kinds of things, that I can do that on my R60 lot?
So, yes and no. Here's what I'll get through that. Let me show you this. So with this with this chart, if you see the farming, you see this section right here, 3.2.6. You can click on this and it'll take you, if I can get it to go, will take you straight to the farming definition. And as you said, here's all the different things that you can do in the definition of farming in the zoning ordinance. Per the zoning ordinance, yes, you can do all the things that are in this list in the definition of farming. However, there's other agencies at play here that will dictate the amount of area and land that you need and or shelter that you need for different animals and the quantity of those animals. So that is enforced between animal control through Montgomery County or the State Office of Agriculture, as well as the USDA. They regulate as far as how many, let's do the smallest thing first because it's the easiest, how many chickens you can have in a given area. All of that is dictated through those agencies. If there's a complaint in Montgomery County, the complaint will go to animal control, and animal control will go out and investigate. If it's something they can handle, they will deal with and say, hey, you got too many chickens or geese or ducks or whatever. You need to minimize them. You need to get rid of some. If they feel that it's way beyond what it should be, they will then contact the state as well as the USDA to say, hey, there's a problem. I don't know what those area requirements are. I apologize. But yes, there are area requirements that will limit you to the number of animals that you can have on a given piece of property. But as long as you're meeting those requirements, the zoning ordinance allows you to have any of those animals. Okay. The only thing that the zoning ordinance will regulate is if you have housing shelter for, say, fowl or farm animals, not pets. Like a doghouse doesn't count. A cat house, if you have a cat house, doesn't count. But like waterfowl animals, a little barn for horses or pigs or chickens or cows, they have to be at least 25 feet from any lot line. That's in the zoning ordinance, and a minimum of 100 feet from any dwelling unit on another property. So not on your own property, but on another property. Okay. But those are really the only regulations, and those are not really in the definition of farming. Those are in the actual development standards for the zones that your property is in. R60 is a perfect example since we were just talking about that. If you scroll down here and you look for R60, it'll give you the development standards table, okay, which will tell you your maximum, the minimum lot area is 6,000 square feet. Put a little footnote next to that. Ignore it if your lot is smaller and you're zoned R60, because there's properties that have existed in this county before we ever have a zoning ordinance. So you may have a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot lot in a R60 zone, not a big deal. But you got your front setbacks, your lot coverage. Lot coverage is only roofed surfaces, not impervious surfaces. And then you get your development standards for setbacks and everything for the house itself. And then when you get down in here to the accessory structures, you've got accessory structure setbacks. Once you get there, there's these little footnotes. Everybody loves footnotes, especially in zoning ordinances. If you ever read any zoning ordinances throughout the entire country, and you have all these little footnotes that talks about this one right here, letter F, and it's going to be close to letter F, depending upon which one of the residential zones you're in. Accessory structures for housing, sheltering, sale of animals, fowl, other than household pets, 25 feet from a lot line or 100 feet from any dwelling unit. Okay. So just keep that in mind. That's really the only major requirement that you run into with the zoning ordinance and setbacks for animals. I can tell you past experiences from being at DPS, a chicken coop on wheels and moving it around the property doesn't work. The neighbors complain, and you might be 25 feet from this lot line, but not that line, and you're 100 feet from this neighbor, but not that neighbor. You start moving it around. Eventually, they'll give you a ticket and say you need to go to court and talk to a judge because you got to meet all those standards. And it's public safety and health kind of thing. So just keep that in mind. So one of the things is this website is americanlegal.com. That's what houses all the zoning ordinance for Montgomery County. All the chapters or sections are there. The entire county code, if you ever need it. So like if you have to deal with animal control, the entire county code is in this American Legal up here. So if you ever run into any other situations, any other place in the county, the entire county code is here. So however many chapters are here, just to let you know. What else? What we got? So we talked about the zoning map. How do I make? I'm trying to get. Anybody know how to make this go up or away? I'll pull this down. Get here. Sorry. So one thing you got to be aware of is when you get into some areas of the county, you may have, say, floodplains, forest conservation areas, those sort of things. Those are really the only areas you need to stay out of on your properties. Usually most of the older subdivisions in the down county area that are R60, R90, unless they went through a subdivision process in the last 20 years or so, more than likely, none of them have forest conservation easements. But if you get into some of the bigger properties, or the newly developed properties in the last 20 years, you may run into forest conservation easements, as well as floodplains, stream valley buffers, that sort of thing. This is our general overall ARC Explorer at Park and Planning. And there, when you scroll over to this side, there's an area that says environmental features. This is a little sensitive this morning. When you expand it down, it'll give you different things. And once you zoom in on a property, these shadowed effects will lighten up or darken so you can click on them. But this particular address, when you look here, this one actually was it Easley. This one pulls from a different base map. So I don't know if it's Bing or Google or whatever, but you can actually see it'll actually pull up addresses all over the world. And then you can click on it. I probably shouldn't use this address because nothing's really going to come up. But you can see there's the property, and you can see how all these different things lightened up over here. And you've got wetlands and you got forests. Mouse doesn't want to work. But if there was something on this property and you need to stay out of it, it would lighten up or show a different color across. And it's not going to show the whole property. It'll just show the area that's affected by that easement and that particular environmental feature that could be issue. But you do want to stay out of those areas because they can tend to get you in some pretty major trouble. I mean, bad news is you got to stay out of them. Good news is the soils are pretty, fertile because they're getting a lot of nutrients from, especially in the trees. You're getting a lot of mulch and composting and stuff taking place naturally. But unfortunately, you got to stay out of those areas for farming activities. Trying to look over my notes here. So, and we talked about the difference between the residential zones and the agricultural zones. Yes, Christina?
Good morning, and thanks for being here, Mark. I wanted to ask the question that Alan had in the chat about HOAs and how those impact ability to farm in different parts of the county. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I was about to get to that actually. Thank you. So HOAs are private organizations within a homeowner. Within a subdivision. HOAs control the subdivision based on their covenants, whatever they have. Montgomery County will not get involved with between a discrepancy between an HOA and a homeowner. It is a pure civil matter between that homeowner and that HOA. The the zoning section is going to enforce the zoning laws. Animal control is going to enforce the animal control laws. If there's something that is allowed by all the county codes, but the HOA says, no, you can't have it, it's going to be a civil matter between that homeowner and the HOA. That's just, it's been like that for years. It's not just with animals, it's with fences, it's with decks, it's with everything else. You've got homeowners associations that'll want white picket fences and somebody wants to put up a wood board on board fence and you can't do it because the HOA won't allow it. But the county's not going to get involved with any of that sort of situation. Okay. Wendy, did you put your hand up? You're welcome.
Yes, thanks. Someone noted in the chat also that the HOA are categorized as common ownership communities and governed accordingly. I was just listening to a podcast the other day that had to do with HOAs with regard to ADUs or accessory dwelling units. And my understanding before and then reinforced from that is a legal matter. It's the state would have to have there'd have to be a new state law that would readjust what was delegated, because all zoning is state right, and the state delegates it down to localities and municipalities, and they delegate to the county, to Montgomery County, what Montgomery County can do, and the HOAs are sort of protected as a separate, smaller local entity. So I don't think the county is allowed to actually change that. I think it requires state action. But I just sent a message to Michelle Caruso. I'm not sure if she'll remember. I feel like there was a state bill last session, maybe someone else knows about this, regarding HOAs and gardens. But I don't know I don't remember anything further what happened with it.
Yeah, it was recently featured in the New York Times, actually, just a few months ago. I'll try to find the article, but it didn't include agriculture, or it was only it was basically a dispute between wanting to have grass and wanting to have a grass-free lawn. But I'll find the article and send it. So
I will tell you this, when solar panels became the rage on top, putting them on top of the roof of your houses, it's probably been 20 years, probably close to that, when people really started doing it, maybe 15. When that started, there was a lot of HOAs saying that you're not putting solar panels on the roof of houses. The state actually passed a bill, it's got to be close to 10 to 12 years ago, that said HOAs cannot tell homeowners they cannot put solar panels on the roof of houses. I do remember that because when I was in zoning as a plan reviewer, they would come in with solar panels on the roof of houses, and it was just a rubber stamp for zoning because you're not increasing your height, you're not affecting the setbacks, and it's like approve them, move out the door. It's like, oh, I got somebody here, HOA said they can't do it. I said, tell them they got to call the state of Maryland, because the state approved a law that says they have no say on solar panels on the roof of houses. So yeah, I think it would take a state bill to take care of that. What else? We talked about that. The one thing I wanted to talk about too was was asked about like on-site farmers markets. Technically, you can have an on-site farmers market anywhere where you have a farming activity. The only real stipulation, which let me try to get back to our zoning ordinance, if that's okay. Gotta find which screen my mouse is on. There's one requirement that basically wherever you're selling your merchandise must be at least 25 feet from any lot line. So again, it's got the L all the way across the screen, which is limited use. And the limited use basically says, come on. Basically, when you see the L, you'll see right here where it says use on-site market, limited use. It talks about in the different zones. And you'll see here, especially in the down county area, R40, R60, R90, all the townhouse communities, multifamily houses, housing, and then all the commercial zones, minimum of 25 feet from any lot line. Okay. Who had their hand up first? Sorry.
I'm sorry, somebody else probably, because I've been talking a lot.
Michelle, did you have I thought, no, okay.
Quick question on that. So 25
Huh?
feet from any lot line, Mark, does that include the front lot line? Meaning like if you have a residential R60 property and you have like a lot of growing there, that you couldn't set up a table at the front of your house by the street?
Technically, yeah, you would have to be set back 25 feet. I'm going to tell you this. I came from zoning before I came here. Zoning is a complaint-based business. So, you know, I would tell people if you want to try it, give it a shot. If your neighbors don't have an issue with it, nobody's going to complain. And guess what? You're good to go. Zoning's not going to come out and say, you're closer than 25 feet. Here's a $500 ticket. Have a good day. Explain it to a judge. They're going to come out and they're going to say, look, you got 30 days or X number of days to move this table back to your front porch, to your garage, whatever, to get it back there. And then that way it gives you an opportunity to make the correction. If they have to keep coming out over and over again, eventually, yeah, they'll get tired of it. They'll issue a ticket, go explain it to a judge, you know. But yeah, unfortunately, that's what the code says. And so that kind of brings me to another point is when it comes to actual, and again, take the HOAs out of it. I'm not going to touch them with a 1,000-foot pole. When it comes to growing, there's nothing in the zoning ordinance that says you can't grow tomatoes or cucumbers or whatever vegetable or fruit right up next to the property line. Okay. There's no setbacks for the actual growing of products. It's for the on-site farmers market and then the structures for housing animals and fowl. So again, it's HOA. They may not allow you to do it in the front yard, or they may say you got to be X number of feet. Again, county's not going to get involved, but the zoning ordinance doesn't get into those kind of situations. Just be aware that, you know, if you're growing something that starts traversing its way onto another person's property because it's a vine type vegetable or fruit, then yeah, you're going to have an issue and it's going to be a civil matter between neighbors. The county is not going to get involved. So just keep that in mind. And please do not ever grow bamboo in this county. It's a nightmare. I believe that was all that I had made notes of that we had discussed on Friday, Lauren.
Sure. Mark, I just wondered, I know that we sort of talked about this, but, you know, I'm wondering the process of basically taking your home and then, you know, getting it kind of reassessed as agricultural land. So if someone has a lot they think is big enough and they want to do the whole farm thing and maybe even have a roadside stand and, you know, they're going to need some permits for some outbuildings and they just think that it's better to have it agriculturally assessed. And I know the Office of Ag has to get involved and everything, but wondering what you might know about
that. That would be someone I was in zoning that I would basically punt the person to the Office of Agriculture. They have the knowledge and the wherewithal to be in the contacts at the state tax office, property tax office to be able to help with that sort of situation. The bigger the land, the easier it is to get that changed over. Smaller lands, it's pretty much almost impossible to get that done. But it's very hard. I mean, the state looks at it as, I mean, this is just my take on the state looks at it as we get more money for residential property than we do for agricultural property. So we're going to do our best to keep a residential tax assessment. That's just my take. I get it. But yeah, it would, if you work with the Office of Agriculture, which I see Natalia here. And that was one of my websites that I was going to kind of just point you guys towards, which I believe is this one. We will find out. Yes, Office of Agriculture will be your friend. They have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, and a lot of context to be able to help you out with that sort of thing.
Wonderful. And, you know Natalia just recently started at the Office of Ag, but maybe we can, you know, invite a speaker from Office of Ag in the future as well to discuss the process there.
Yeah,
Kate.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you. And Kate, you have your hand up.
Well, I had the same question as somebody else just raised. So Jenny put it in the chat and she worded it much more succinctly than I was going to be able to. So I'll just read hers. And she says, is there a difference between a property that is taxed as an agricultural property and zoned as an agricultural property?
I can actually just jump in really fast too. Like we can, for example, my property is tax. It wasn't like a question, it's like more of a statement because my property is taxed ag. And that means I have to like sell a certain amount of product per year as a farm. But I am still zoned RE2. So it's, I guess, what does that have, acre lots or something or whatever?
Yeah, it's a minimum of 2 acre lot, but
Or
so
2 acre lots, sorry.
correct. No, you're right. Yes, there is a difference between tax assessed as an ag use and an ag property zoned. Ag zone would be AR zoned. The tax assessment is the one that helps to be able to maybe either not have to get building permits for an outbuilding, or maybe the outbuilding's not counted towards your maximum lot coverage because they're exempt from lot coverage if it's an ag building for ag use on ag land. So that's where you really want the ag assessment. You can have any property can be ag assessed, but be zoned anything if you qualify for those state requirements. It's just meeting those state requirements to be able to get ag assessed. You can have AR zone pieces of property that are, residentially tax assessed. The county has, over the last 20, 30 years, the county's rezoned different properties throughout the county. And prior to AER, it was called RDT zone. There's an old subdivision up in Clarksburg. It's more than just that one, but there's an old subdivision up in Clarksburg that I've known about my entire life that was originally zoned RR, which is same as R200 back when it was developed in the late 60s, early 70s. When the county did an overlay for the RDT zone back in the 80s, that subdivision got rezoned RDT, and all the lots are 20,000 square foot lots, and they're all residentially assessed. But today they're zoned AR, but they're being taxed at a residential use because they're all single family detached houses. So that's the difference between the tax assessment ag versus the ag zone. The ag zone is just AR zone. That's the only ag zone there is. But you could have little pockets of AR zone pieces of property that are either residentially tax assessed, tax exempt because they're churches or private organizations. There's even some commercial ones out there because you'll have landscape contractors who have got conditional uses or special exceptions over the years, and they're commercial use. There's some old existing commercial businesses that have been around before zoning that are in AR zone areas that are actually commercial tax assessed. So it just depends.
And Mark, I think we have one question in the chat that is basically, do you know if there's any do you know how the urban farming tax credit is applied and if there's any interaction with planning and zoning?
I do not know anything about the urban farming tax credit. Sorry. I do apologize. I'm not familiar with that.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a totally different area, isn't it?
Yep.
So let's see. I think also Susan Eisendrath has a question as well. I can just read it. That there are issues for residential food growers that could be considered urban farms, such as fencing and permits, growing plants such as edible weeds that grow to a height that is considered to be issues related to zoning, and other challenges too, which need to be listed and addressed for urban farm food growers. Do you have any thoughts about that, Mark? Or?
So if you're on a residential lot, any fence is going to need a residential fence permit. The DPS charges like $70 some for those fence permits. The fence can be up to 6 feet 6 inches in height. It's got to be entirely on the owner's land. It can't be on the lot line. If it's on the lot line or you're going to install it on the lot line, you got to have written permission from that neighbor that you're sharing that lot line with. There's no setback requirement for that fence if it's 6 feet 6 inches or less in height. I typically tell people pull a string line from property corner to property corner, put the fence in so that it's not touching that string line for about 2 inches off of it or so. And that way you're definitely on your property 100%. A property line is a finite line, like a little piece of hair. I mean, it's just, it's just a line. As far as the actual plants, there's nothing in the zoning ordinance that says you can't grow tomato plants 10 foot tall. Yeah, there's nothing as far as the maximum height of plants that you're growing. The only thing it talks about it talks about height in the zoning ordinance is building height. And that's measured to either the highest part of a flat roof or peak roof, or the midpoint of a sloped roof. And the key word there is roof, and plants don't have roofs, so.
And just following up with that, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I think also Susan had mentioned invasives, and that's a really good question. It's that some things that a lot of urban farmers grow might not be recognized as an agricultural plant. It might be something that they're growing that's, say, like, I don't know, I'm thinking like prickly lettuce or thistle or something, where you're growing it intentionally, but others can perceive it as a weed. Is that something zoning gets involved with?
No, that's not, zoning's not going to get involved with that.
Great. Okay. And thank you, Natalia, for sharing the county page on the urban ag property tax credit. Are there any more questions for Mark before we move on? Great. All this has been a perfect segue into the presentation on Koiner Farm. And if you all haven't ever been to Koiner Farm, it's an amazing place. It's a farm right in the heart of Silver Spring. You'd never realize how close it is. I wanted to say, actually, but backing up a little bit, I just realized that I would be remiss if I didn't just say, Mark, thank you so much for that extremely informative presentation. That really has cleared up a lot of confusion for me. I hope it has for everybody else. And I just really, really appreciate your time.
Not a problem at all. Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce our folks from Koiner Farm. Kate Medina is the executive director, Danila Sheveiko representing Koiner Farm. And they are going to explain to us how Koiner Farm has been able to successfully apply the urban ag tax credits. And thank you, Kate.
Yeah, actually, I'm representing Koiner Farm, and Danila is representing his farm, the Urban Sanctuary Farm, sort of at the intersection of Wheaton and Kensington. I think your actual address is Kensington, Danila, but I always think of you as more Wheaton since you sort of back to the Wheaton Mall. Let's see, can I share my screen here? I'm gonna go, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Is there any way I could get that?
Absolutely, just one moment, Kate.
Yeah, Mark, that was an awesome presentation and really clarified a lot of questions that have just sort of been lingering, I know for myself personally and for others on this call. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, I got it.
Sharing enabled. Thank you.
Okay. And I need to go, let me just move this slideshow. Okay. And minimize that. All right, can you guys see the first slide here?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this presentation is less about Koiner Farm and more about the urban agriculture property tax credit, which was great that there was a question right at the end about this, about the tax credit. And now we just kind of get to talk about it. Again, Danila and I are in no way experts, but we represent two farms that have been successful in accessing this property tax credit. And we just sort of wanted to share our experience and what we've learned, and yeah, and then answer any questions that you all may have. So I'll go ahead and get started, and then I'm going to turn things over to Danila. So let's see here. Why are you not moving to the next page? Sorry. There we go. All right, we got it now. Okay, so a couple things. We're going to just briefly talk about sort of urban farming in general in Montgomery County, although Mark and I we're using the same websites to draw from for our information. So I don't really have to go into that too much since we just covered most of what I have to say. Then a little bit on Bill 3116, which is the urban ag property tax credit for Montgomery County. And then, as I mentioned, just like sort of personal accounts of dealing with this tax credit from the Koiner Farm perspective, and then from the urban sanctuaries perspective. And then finally, you know, Danila and I have identified a couple barriers that we see with regard to urban farming and how possible amendments specific to Bill 3116 could potentially lower these barriers. We can talk about those. Okay. So yeah, so allowable urban farming practices in Montgomery County was just covered so wonderfully by Mark. There is the link to zoning section 329, which has to do with allowable urban farming practices. As Mark mentioned, farming is allowed throughout the county, and then specific to down county areas, it is allowed as a limited use. So I talked about some of the restrictions right here and go into a little bit more specifics. For example, the minimum area to be considered an urban farm is 2,500 feet. We talked about animals and fowl, just some specifics. There's like 1 chicken per 1,000 square feet. Sure, but then where you put their shelter, you know, that's what I learned. I'm like, I didn't even know about that shelter piece. So thank you very much, Mark. And then a little bit on aquaculture and the accessory buildings. And then finally, what type of equipment can be used in urban areas. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to give a little background on the urban ag property tax credit and then talk about how it has been used at Koiner Farm. And then turn it over to Danila. So, you know, just background here, in March of 2017, the county council unanimously passed Bill 3116, which gave property owners the opportunity to apply for a property credit up to 80% of their total property. This bill was originally intended specifically for Koiner Farm. It was Lynn Koiner, Charlie Koiner's daughter, who approached her council member. At the time, this was Tom Hucker, who approached her council member, and with the problem of they have this beautiful farm. It's been there for 40 years, but they're paying about $21,000 to $24,000 a year in property taxes, and they couldn't afford to keep doing that. At the time, Charlie Koiner was about 96 years old. Anyways, so county council jumped into action and this bill was created. Many of the standards were set to accommodate Koiner Farm, to make sure that Koiner Farm would be eligible for this bill. And so some of the things, you know, if you go down here to requirements, the size of the property, no less than 1/2 acre. The location must be within 1/2 mile of a metro zone. You know, there's only 10 metro zones in Montgomery County. One of them is Silver Spring, downtown Silver Spring. And then the production piece also, the limitation is that you have to produce at least $5,000 worth of agricultural products. That's pretty stringent, especially considering that for the state of Maryland to be considered a farm of any size, rural or urban, the limit is $2,500 worth of ag products. So the urban ag property tax credit is more stringent than the state definition of a farm. But again, that was what Charlie Koiner said he was doing. He was producing about $5,000 worth a year. So I will add that the Koiners, they did apply for the property tax credit. They received it, but Charlie passed away before receiving his check. No matter when he found out how much he was going to receive, even though he didn't see the check, he that day said he felt like he had won the lottery and was really, you know, obviously so happy. Today, though, Koiner Farm is now protected under a conservation easement. And this is the last year. So the way that the tax credit works is that one application is good for 5 years, but you need to certify each year and show that you are in fact producing these $5,000 worth of farm products. So Lynn Koiner has continued to produce at this level and show evidence of that. This is a side note, but the way it works at Koiner Farm is that Lynn Koiner owns the land and therefore owns all of the products, all of the farm products that are grown, even though those products are grown with the support of the community, but she still owns them because she owns the land. She then donates all of the farm products that are grown to a 501c3, which is the Charles Koiner Conservancy. So it's a pretty streamlined for her. And then in return, we provide her with an in-kind receipt for the value of her donation. And so she just uses that receipt as evidence of how much produce has been grown. But as I said, this is the last year of that first 5-year term. Each farm is eligible for 2 5-year terms for a maximum of 10 years of total tax credits. Beyond that, you can't reapply, is how I understand it. But Lynn is considering not reapplying to Montgomery County's urban ag property tax credit because of the conservation easement. She actually it's a better deal for her to get the property taxes abated through the state than with the county. So yeah, just providing that background there. Okay, that's all I have on Koiner Farm and sort of the background on the tax credit. Danila, do you want to chime in here? Because you have like an actual real life example of a resident as a property owner accessing this tax credit when it wasn't created and tailored just for you. So how has that been working out for you?
All right. Well, it's been sporting, as they say in the old country. Grew up on a 1/4 acre subsistence farm, so had daily farm chores since I was trusted to not put random things in my mouth. And living here in Kensington Heights, right next to Wheaton, over a decade, we lost over 10 acres of green space to development. And then we lost the Kensington Orchids to development, which was the largest collection of orchids in North America. And so when its sister operation, Kensington Azalea operation, went up for sale, we just had to throw down and rescue it from development. And so it was tough. People were talking about affordability. We have a 27-year-old truck and have to penny pinch on everything. And so this tax credit is a great help to sustain the operation. With that said, being the first real applicant, it was tough. Like, if I wasn't the former, I'm a civic activist and former chair of the land use committee for my civic association and former president of my civic association, and spent 3 years helping to draft the Wheaton sector plan. And I co-hold the record for longest land use hearing in Montgomery County history. 38 days with breaks for lunch and almost 10,000 pages of transcripts. If I didn't have that experience, I would not be able to get the urban farm tax credit. I don't want to drag everybody through all of the agonizing details, but really it was tough, and definitely don't want to blame the Office of Agriculture. Once we figured out all the quirks and the kinks And the snags, they've been wonderful to us, and I should send those people Christmas cards. But, until all of that was worked out, it was an uphill battle. And, as with many things in the county, I blame the county council for lack of clear legislative and regulatory language in the enabling legislation. And so that's where we're at. We only have 2 participants in this program as it stands. And we're first and foremost an ecosystem restoration project. So we have over 400 species of native plants and counting. We keep bees, we have a bee yard, we grow mushrooms, and we do have a market garden. And boy, that the ramp up to 5,000 was a tough slog, let me tell you. And without going into all the challenges, because they have been many. So just by the virtue of that, it has really been like launching into orbit, that similar level of challenge. And just wanted to thank Mark Beall for the super informative presentation, and wanted to disagree on only one point, which was don't plant bamboo, non-native bamboo, but do plant native bamboo. It was actually the dominant feature of the pre-colonial landscape in the 22 southeastern American states, including in the Chesapeake region. We had native bamboo forests. One was as large as Montgomery County at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. So, and that ecosystem is critically endangered. So please plant bamboo, just the native type, river cane and switch cane. Thank you, and I'm available for questions.
Thanks, Danila. I recall when you were going through the application process, discussion over how to get to the $5,000 threshold for farm products. And it says here, $5,000 in ag products sold/donated. Can you tell everyone like where that netted out in terms of, I think the question was, can you only donate the farm products, or can you only sell the farm products, or can you do a hybrid in which you donate a certain value and you sell a certain value? How do you do it at the urban sanctuary?
Well, we that's a great question. We end up doing a hybrid. And that was not clear in the language, and so we had to work with the Office of Agriculture and with the county council and with the county executive. We really had to tap people to really interpret the intent of the bill as written to really figure this out. And so yes, as it stands, we both sell and donate.
Great. And your farm, it's an LLC. And so what sort of like documentation do you have to provide annually to certify that you're still upholding the requirements of the tax credit, like your Schedule F, or just like, yeah, sorry.
Well, we did use an LLC to begin with, but it was just too onerous, and so the land is registered. So it was basically family and friends. Everybody had to come together to bid out the developers, and so the land is in private, complex ownership, and the LLC was just a front for the farm operation itself, but that just proved to be too burdensome. And so this year we're actually applying. Well, my partner is actually going to apply as an individual because she's on the title to both of the lots. Her name is on the title of both of the lots. So she's going to apply to receive the tax credit as an individual. But yes, it has been complicated, and I understand why there has to be a process. Otherwise, of course, the county doesn't want to lose its lifeblood, which is property taxes from single family residences. And so it doesn't want people with a couple of beds of herbs to not pay their property taxes. So you understand that a certain process is needed. And so it's essentially, there's two ways to go. You can either go with Farm F if you're filing the IRS Farm F, or you can just provide receipts of the sales and invoices, and donate. If it's donated, then the 501c3, it has to be a registered nonprofit, has to provide a receipt of some kind for the donations. So it's it's complicated, but it's not too horrible. It could be. It's definitely for Office of Agriculture. The more clear direction they get, the easier their job is. So it definitely, there's room for improvement in the specific requirements for documentation.
Great. Thank you, Danila. And our last slide here, and then we'll open up to questions. We just created a little slide about barriers to urban farming and trying to, there's probably more than this, but this was the top list that we came up with. The number one is, of course, access to land. And I can really speak to that personally from spending several years now as the executive director of a land trust dedicated to urban farming, and having several different mechanisms to protect land for urban farming. But you got to find the land first. So anyways, of course, maintaining an urban farm, it's time consuming, it's exhausting. It's also economically really unsustainable as it stands now. Like there's a lot of investment that has to go into this. And I think as we see more urban farms and further develop that market, urban farming will be more sustainable. But right now, I think that's a fear that the investment in the urban farm will be lost. And so having a business plan, a community support plan is critical to accessing that land. I would also add that, as Danila provided testimony to, Montgomery County's rules and regulations around urban farming are a little confusing. I even didn't understand fully some of, not like I'm like an expert, but I didn't understand fully the relationship between animal control and for example, with permitting at Koiner Farm, we've had to apply for permits. Our first permitting process was rejected because we talked about an urban farm, but permitting doesn't have a definition for urban farming. So we were told to use gardening. And then our permit was approved. But if you didn't know that, it could just slow down your process. Anyway, so I wrote here that the zoning regulations differ from the tax credit regulations, differ from permitting regulations. So some sort of clarification and streamlining of that would be helpful for people. And then related to maintaining the land is a trained workforce. And then again, related to all of this is further developing that market, that supply and demand. Plenty of studies show that hyper-local product distribution, the value far outweighs, is more than the sum of its parts, right? It adds community building, it stabilizes against market swings, it provides education, but yet it doesn't necessarily get the necessary funding or support needed to keep those small scale hyper-local markets sustainable. Anyway, so that's all we have. Thank you all for listening, and we'll take questions.
Okay, and I see Angie, you have your hand up.
That was actually the clapping. I was saying thank you so much, Kay and Danila, for taking the time out and explaining kind of the barriers to entry for you both and the push points. Obviously, the mojo of this team really works on things being easy and streamlined, and obviously that is not the case currently. So appreciate you laying out those barriers.
I saw Lori had a question. What is the acreage of your farm? Koiner Farm is 1 acre and the urban sanctuary is 1.5 acres. Is that correct, Danila? Okay. What is the current status of amending the tax credit? And what, oh, Susan, deep question. Susan says, what is the current status of amending the urban ag tax credit? And what would be the impact of amending it? What are the goals for establishing urban farms? And are there any other people who want to apply or could apply for the tax credit? I know that Danila had to submit a FOIA to try to figure out if anyone else had applied when he was applying to get that information. But to our understanding, I don't know of anyone else who is applying. Oh, and I see hands are up too. So sorry. Natalia?
Yes. Hi, everyone. It's not a question, just a comment. So on residentially assessed properties, in order to build something like a high tunnel, you are required to get a building permit and you're required to pay the fee, which can be very expensive for starting farms. So one thing that Jeremy Chris, my boss, the director of the Office of Ag, has suggested is that the building permit fee be waived for these residentially assessed properties. He's not saying the building permit process should be waived. That should still happen just to make sure that everyone's being treated the same and all the proper procedures are followed, but just the fee being waived would be very helpful. And he suggested that the MoCo Food Council and other organizations provide letters of support for this suggestion, or in some way show their support for having DPS waive the fee. So that would be the agency who would make that decision, I believe.
That would be really helpful. As a nonprofit-led farm, Koiner Farm has multiple revenue streams. And so without a grant, installing our high tunnel, really, there's no way that we would have been able to do that based on just the revenue from sale of farm products. So that was, yeah, and so that'd be helpful. Thank you, Natalia. That's awesome. That's a great idea. I hope somebody wrote that down. Lisa?
Thanks. First of all, thank you, Kate and Danila. That was really helpful to hear that synthesis of your experience. And for me, I particularly value your final slide on the barriers. You know, as someone who dreams of having a micro farm in Long Branch, in my broader neighborhood, a place where the marginalized neighborhood communities could participate in growing and could participate in receiving fresh local produce. I have to admit that final slide feels really discouraging in the sense that, you know, I mean, I know that farming is time consuming, but to hear in such a succinct way, it's economically unsustainable, high burnout rate, you know, I think it then begs the question for all of us who are presumably gathered here because we believe that we want to see more land access and more activity like this, begs the question, okay, so why is it that we believe that this is worthwhile, right? So your last bullet point where you talk about community building and other benefits of urban farming are partly where I'd love to see us really put some effort into quantifying. So if it means, you know, quantifying and really articulating in depth what makes all of those things worthwhile, and also how do we work on lowering those barriers, which is I think where we really want to go with this. So is it, you know, more workforce development? You know, is it seeking ways of paying farmers more? What are the ways of reducing those barriers? So I'm just interested, particularly Kate and Danila, what are your current thoughts based on your experiences? But obviously it's a question for everybody.
Yeah. That's a really big topic, Lisa. Thank you. I guess as you were speaking, I was just thinking the more the more urban farms that we have in Montgomery County, the more we'll be able to quantify those. But we can look to other examples, like what's going on in Baltimore, what's going on in PG County, some of our, or in DC, some of our neighbors who are a little bit more advanced in terms of embracing urban farming, and see how their governments are realizing the benefits in certain communities. Danila, did you want to add anything to Lisa's comment?
I just, well, it's a really big topic.
Really big. But that's, I think that's definitely something that this group, the Equitable Land Access Policy Priority Group, is thinking about. And as you said, how to quantify this, because if we are going to say expand the tax credit, what is the property tax loss to the county? But then what are the economic benefits of what we're doing? And how does that drive the economy of the county? And not drive, but contribute to the economic benefits of the county. So yeah, having those numbers, Lisa, you're absolutely right. I also saw questions in here. It says, where do you sell? And Danila, what was the biggest challenge to getting the tax credit? And also, how far are you from the metro zone?
Well, we are directly abutting the metro policy area, which is the technical term of art. But well, there were a number of challenges, I guess. One was they were measuring the distance from the platform from the metro station platform, because they weren't given clear instructions, and so there had to be this whole stage of interpreting the intent of the legislative language, which, to me was clear that you have to measure the distance from the boundary of the metro policy area. That's the term that is used there, not from the platforms, which is not a term used in the bill. So, that was a challenge. There were a number. Every stage had hiccups, and once again, this is a new process for everybody. So, yeah, every step had challenges.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Oh, Susan, last question, I think. Esther just said we have time for one question.
Oh, I'm so lucky. I guess I'm wondering, so there are a lot of questions in the chat related to the very wonderful presentation on mostly the challenges. And I'm wondering, for next steps, what does that mean for the office? Is it the Office of Agriculture? Is it Montgomery Planning? Is it the Office of Food System Resilience? Is it the Food Council? Who is the entity that's taking responsibility for coordinating, really putting down on paper what exactly we need to modify? Because it's been in existence long enough for it to be evaluated. And who on the council would we go to in order to start to work with, in order to establish, some kind of goal by the end of the year, changing the tax credit? I don't know, just a crazy idea out there.
Fabulous question, Susan. And I think that's one of the first initiatives of the Equitable Land Access Group, which is, I think, why we were asked to talk about our experience, and then to take that and come up with a plan for suggesting amendments, identifying a council lead and staff person. But I'm not sure who.
I can say that the Office of Ag can definitely advocate to the county council any changes to the urban ag tax credit. We, of course, would not introduce bills or make those decisions. That would be the county council. But yeah, we do have conversations with them, with the members.
Great, thank you, Natalia.
Thank you for that, Natalia. Yes, and it's also a matter of both kind of legislative language and regulatory language, and so we're having more problems with the regulatory side of things, and sometimes that can be resolved with executive regulation, right? So the county executive and county agencies actually do have the power to submit regulatory bills for approval of the county council. So the Office of Agriculture could lead on that front as well. And just to add, in terms of regulatory language, so for example, DPS, when we started, there was a barrage of anonymous complaints to DPS, and DPS came down like a ton of bricks on us. And of course, if we weren't civic activists and we could quote AM Legal, the code, and the charter of the county, we would have been minced meat. So yes, it needs to be interagency cooperation at the regulatory level, not just legislative.
Yes, thank you, Danila. And that's a great point. Actually, the county executive, Mark Elridge, is a big supporter of urban agriculture. So he would support the Office of Ag communicating with DPS, with county council members to make these changes.
Well, thank you so much for all of these great questions. And thank you so much for our speakers. Just really appreciate that, Danila and Kate, for going through your very interesting experience with the Urban Ag Tax Credit. Thank you all for staying a minute or two over time. Just wanted to say, for those of you who have to go, you're sort of, in essence, dismissed from I know we're over time. I wanted to say, Mark had messaged me that he forgot to mention something about during his presentation. Mark, are you still on? And did you want to address that, or did you want to also address something else? Or
No, I just yeah, I got 11 o'clock, so I do need to go, but I did want to catch one thing that I forgot to mention. Everybody's favorite subject is roosters. I don't know if you know roosters, they can get loud sometimes. Neighbors tend to not like them. DPS zoning ordinance, the only thing that it addresses roosters is in urban farming. It says urban farming, no roosters. Regular farming does not say anything about roosters. However, sometimes if enough complaints come in about a rooster in a neighborhood, the animal control office sometimes will go out and talk with the folks and say, you need to calm the rooster or do something. I don't know what, but they tend to, on the farms, they don't do anything about it because obviously it's a farm that's out in the countryside. But in neighborhoods, they tend to go through and they might use their noise nuisance law that they have, which pertains mainly to dogs, to enforce on roosters to say, hey, you need to either get rid of the rooster or do something because the rooster can't be making that noise all the time. So just to let you know, that's something that becomes an issue at times. DPS zoning under the normal farming definition in all your residential zones will pretty much say, sorry, there's nothing there, but animal control sometimes will come out and say something to people about the nuisance law. Thank you.
all right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for your participation today. Thank you, Mark, Kate, Danila. And you really have given our leadership team a lot to think about, ponder, and move forward with. And we will moving forward, we'll get out the notes according to this meeting and just keep on working on these issues. So thank you so much, everybody, and hope you have a wonderful day.